Thank you for that introduction. It's good to be with you today. I'm very excited to talk with you about the future of Silicon Valley and the future of work in Silicon Valley. I've been thinking a lot about how we rebuild and restore our sense of community after the year we've just spent in isolation from one another. Before we go to the future, I want you to come with me just for a moment and go back to the last time. It was probably about a year ago this time. The last time you were together in a large group setting, in a large communal setting with other people. It may have been gathered with friends at a restaurant or a birthday party. For me, it was a Warriors game. I met with a couple of clients, a colleague from work, people who I consider friends. We met in the plaza outside. It was this very active, engaging public space. And inside the arena, people were together. We had a drink and some dinner on the concourse and enjoyed the game. Not a particularly great basketball game, but it was the sense of belonging and being together, which made it such an enjoyable and memorable experience. Something we took for granted at the time. And since then, all of our public spaces fell quiet. Whether it was a Warriors game or a concert or being together with friends at a restaurant, whatever it was, there was that time when we were unconcerned about the physical distance, the space between us and other people. We all know what happened since then. With the shelter-in-place order, we all pivoted very quickly. We went home and stayed. At my firm, Gensler, we went from 50 offices on Friday to 6,000 offices on Monday. And many of you did something similar. We learned to adapt to this new way of working very quickly. We were isolated from each other, no longer together as a community, and we started using the words, "we're all in this together," more and more. Ironically, paradoxically, we were alone together. We were separated, but feeling some sense of together. And the challenges, the struggle of that moment brought us more together. We realized we were more connected than ever. The very air we breathe is shared by all of us around the entire world. Just as we were adapting to working remotely, and at first everyone thought that was great. At first, people thought, "I'm never going back to the office. This is wonderful. I'm going to stay this way forever." We've realized that since that's not quite the case. But just as we were adapting to working in that environment, in that mode, we added another challenge, another struggle to the experience of 2020. With the death of George Floyd, we confronted and grappled with the issues of historic and systemic injustices, both racial and in social inequities. We realized that we're all one community and we have to come together to build a more inclusive sense of community. And after that, we went forward from that moment to a time when the wildfire season began early and the skies were filled with smoke, fires all over the Bay Area, activities that we could do like outdoor camping, some of the few things that we felt like we could do to be together with others safely were now also lost to us. And September 9th was the day in particular that we all will remember, I think, for a long time, when climate change all of a sudden became very real, very present, not distant and far off and slow moving, but something that was immediate, that required immediate, urgent attention. Because September 9th was the day last year when the skies stayed dark all day. We awakened in the morning and realized that the dawn was not coming. and the sky was overcast orange. It was bewildering. People were confused. We thought, what more could this year possibly challenge us with? We had already learned we couldn't take things for granted, but now we learned that we couldn't even take for granted that the sun would rise tomorrow, as we so often comfort ourselves with in times of challenge and struggle. Now we come to a moment where there feels like there's light at the end of the tunnel. With the advent of the vaccines that are proving effective and being rolled out, we sense an opportunity to get back to normal. We are talking about, you hear it all the time now, let's return to normal. I can't wait to get back to a sense of normalcy. I want to challenge us with not just going back to the way things were, but going forward to a better future. As an architect and designer, I envision this new future, and I think we all can together. We can build a new future that we want to exist. It's up to us. What we wish to do, what we have the will to do, we'll find a way to do. Before 2020, we already had other challenges that we were grappling with. We realized that monoculture environments like retail centers, as one example, were already under distress, being challenged. And many of these were being reimagined and re-envisioned as future mixed-use environments, places that create incredible opportunity to add additional housing, something we urgently need, and other mixtures of uses that would activate these spaces 24/7, as Ben was describing in his introduction. These environments are ripe opportunities for integrated mixed-use districts. And before 2020, we were already designing for experience. In our work at SFO, our renovation of the terminals, we've transformed the experience of boarding an airline from a transaction, one that was often dreaded, into an experience that people looked forward to. We recreated the sense of a San Francisco city street in the concourse. We brought in restaurants and retail shops tucked in between the gates that made it feel like you were in part of San Francisco. And we brought in local restaurants and shops that made a specific place. It's not just a ubiquitous airport space, but a specific place that feels like San Francisco. And we saw concession sales rise. People started arriving earlier for their flights. And SFO has been consistently ranked one of the top airports in the world. All of this while also addressing climate change by challenging ourselves to strive towards net zero energy goals, one of the first of its kind for an airport. So this sense of design for experience was something we were already working with. Now, as we go forward into the future, we have to ask ourselves, what have we learned that we want to take with us? We innovated very quickly in 2020, as I mentioned. We got out of our own way and implemented new ideas quickly. So what will we take with us? At Gensler, we know that people will want to go back to work because of the experience of being together, a sense of belonging and community that comes with being together, physically, in person. In our workplace survey, we found that 88% of people want to return to work 4 days a week. We also found, when we look into the details, that the overwhelming reason why people want to go back to work is to be together with colleagues. And interestingly, it was the younger generation that felt this way the strongest. In additional follow-up surveys around hybrid work experience, we found that a majority of people, more than half, want a hybrid work experience and a hybrid model available to them as they go forward. We've found that work from home has created, in some ways, a more inclusive work community and environment for some, but it's challenging for others. Not everybody has a setup that accommodates work from home in equal terms. So as we imagine the future of the workplace, we can start to think about how we build in this hybrid work experience. We can think about a front porch, a concept of coming into the office where we integrate a neighborhood of people in person with digital remote collaborators. This new corner office might include the best of elements working from home and the best of working together in the office. And we could imagine digital avatars present here so that the remote participant is no longer a disembodied voice on a Polycom in the middle of a conference room table. We've all been there and experienced that. But it's a rich, immersive engagement with your colleagues. If this sounds like a far-fetched idea, I will just remind us all that we are in Silicon Valley, the place that makes this kind of innovation possible. We can imagine an agile office that accommodates different work modes. People will go back to work. The question is how they will work in the future. And this agile workplace will allow people to be more flexible in the way that they structure their days. We don't just focus on Fridays and work from home on Fridays and go into the office the other days to collaborate. Our days are mixed use in and of themselves, and the office needs to accommodate this. We can imagine a concept of the connected kitchen where people come together, the amenities of the office bring people together. It's not the coffee or the kombucha that brings people to the office, but those are the glue that bring people together. It's a gravitational point that bring people together. If we take this idea of the front porch in the office and in the workplace, and we extend it to the building, how the building meets the street, we can start to imagine a way that the building provides amenities to the neighborhoods around it. And this is a way that we can imagine building and restoring a sense of community. We've done this in projects already. The public open space at the ground floor of the LinkedIn Tower on 2nd Street in San Francisco is a great example where people came together just because it was a nice space to be in. It was a place where you could encounter others, unmediated by screens, unexpected encounters with people that you maybe didn't anticipate seeing. We've also done this on projects like Netflix, where the ground floor is an open space where people can come in and see live streaming content available for the first time. This creates a brand touch point for the company who's occupying the building with a greater public who are casually passing by. And it transcends what we used to think of as a building lobby. This kind of rich programming of the ground floor is something that we're also doing in downtown San Jose in our work with Jay Paul at CityView, where we've created open plazas that welcome and invite the general public in and extend the Plaza de Cesar Chavez, which is the oldest public open space in California. That space is extended into this office campus, if you will. This open ground plane is activated with pedestrian pass-throughs that are available and accessible. That sense of community that is created with active edges and an active ground plane and open accessible spaces. That's the future of what we can design. And in other projects elsewhere around the world, we're already thinking about this idea of integrated use and mixed use communities. We know that the 20-minute city is an idea that's regaining some attention now. And many talk about this as the way that we create neighborhoods that accommodate all of our needs within a 20-minute distance. Or as a colleague of mine likes to say, it should be within 2 minutes of on-demand services. But how do we design a more equitable and inclusive 20-minute city? How do we look at the neighborhood and the demographics and provide some of the necessary but unmet needs to help restore and rebuild neighborhoods as we come out of this. We've already done some of this innovation. We see that slow streets movement quickly adapted as we moved needless bureaucracy out of our way to take back some of the one of the largest public assets that we all commonly own, our streets. We took back some of that roadway surface and created parklets and slow streets for neighbors and communities to come together and connect. That kind of innovation, those are ideas that will be with us to stay. We will go back and redesign and enhance the way that those were quickly implemented initially. But those are the best ideas that come out of this kind of time that we'll want to keep with us, because they create opportunities for people to meet neighbors for the first time. They create new opportunities to have active districts where we didn't imagine it was possible before. That is a way that we build community. One of the key demographic trends that's underlying and driving so much of what I've been describing is the increasing shift to new generations in the workforce. In just 4 years, millennials, also called Generation Y, will be 75% of the workforce. 75%. And when we survey this generation, what we find is an overwhelming majority, 84%, rank purpose, the mission of the company, as the first and primary aspect of what engages them, and where they look for alignment with the purpose of their company for their own personal values. We see that where organizational goals and personal purpose overlap, these companies are more resilient. Companies that adapt and use the lessons of this time will be more resilient, more purposeful. They'll have more engaged employees. This will give them a competitive differentiator. And to do that, we have to bring people together in person. People who come together in person collaborate. We know this sparks innovation. We find common cause with each other. This drives organizations forward. One of our CEO clients says, he's a very successful company. He says, I come to work every day imagining that I will be out of business in 30 days because that's what my competitor wants. And that drive, that motivation is what he wants his employees to have and to be engaged with. That is the underpinning of the idea where innovation is the imperative. We all know the household names of companies that didn't keep up, that didn't survive the transition to an online economy. But we also know how to do this in the Bay Area and in Silicon Valley. We face challenges. We all know what they are. And the challenges of 2020 have made many of these very clear to us. But at the same time, when I look at the Bay Area, I'm incredibly optimistic. We have a tech ecosystem here that is unrivaled elsewhere in the world. And we also have a sciences ecosystem that is unrivaled elsewhere in the world. We have the overlap of the tech and sciences ecosystem mean that new industries are emerging and being formed. In fact, data, the exchange of information, what we just saw in this past year in terms of scientific collaboration and the exchange of information, is opening up entirely new industries. New degree programs are emerging around data science. We have learned, all of us have learned in this past year, that data, in fact, underpins everything we do, from epidemiology to urban design. We can see this future in robotics and artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, the optical devices, the graphic processing chips that go into a self-driving car is just one example where we see incredible innovation and new companies emerging and being formed. As we move forward, we have the knowledge of 2020 to guide us. We've acquired a lot of wisdom in this very tough year. We can go back to the ways where we worked in isolation and competition with each other, or we can come together and work collaboratively, both as separate organizations, but also in public and private partnerships. We can join together to address some of the challenges we face. We've learned that we are more connected than ever before. Through the pandemic, we realized that my actions, my personal actions, have an impact on people around the world who I've never met, places I may never go. I am personally responsible for those actions and in the way that I guide my organization. We've learned through the social unrest that we're all part of one community. The root word of community is common, that which we hold in common. And we have learned through the challenges of the forest fires that we all must be adaptable and resilient. And we must urgently build more resilient communities and buildings. Much of our work is already moving in this way towards net zero carbon goals, much of what I've shared with you today. So as we look forward, we can imagine this future that we can build. And if we look back on 2020 from some future vantage point, I think we might see it as a year of enlightenment, a year of transition. We might see 2020 in different terms, where it is no longer just the toughest year of many of our lives, but a catalytic moment that has led to our best decade ever. Thank you very much.
Ben, thank you. Fascinating, interesting, provocative. It was also thorough. So I have some questions. Can I pose a few? Are you willing to be spontaneous with me?
Of course.
Let's start by just talking about interiors. With respect to the disease and the jitteriness that people will feel when we finally go back into enclosed spaces, should we be imagining plexiglass all over the place? Is that what it's going to take for people to feel comfortable working together? What is your thinking about enclosed offices versus the open office plan? Curious about your thoughts.
Yes. You know, it's interesting, Russ. When we first started into this pandemic, there was a lot of focus on surfaces that we touch and the air we breathe. And we had ideas. At first, everybody thought, well, copper, the virus doesn't transmit on copper, so we have to change all of the hardware to copper. And how will we ride elevators again? And we have to have UV lights and like advanced filtration systems for our air.
Exactly.
But then we realized there are people all over the world who live in high-rise buildings who are dealing with this, who ride elevators every day. And the transmission on surfaces was more well understood with the passing of time. What we think will come out of this is a continued attention to public health and wellness in the workplace. It will no longer be acceptable. Remember, think about some of the cultural habits that will change. Remember when you would hear about a friend perhaps retiring, and a common thing would say, never missed a day of work, right? We used to wear that as a badge of honor. We think those days are gone. The idea of going to work sick will be really frowned upon just culturally. And so we can imagine where health and wellness, that stays with us. We've all had this this continued focus on that aspect of our daily lives. So in the office environment, there's an additional focus now on the air quality. And some of our work, some of our projects were already designed for very advanced sustainability. Our work at PNC Tower, for example, which was designed to be the greenest high-rise in the world. It's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The air changes out in that project and that building every 5 minutes when it's in a natural ventilation mode. That's exactly the kind of environment you want when we're talking about a healthy well-being of the people who are in the building. And the people who work there love it because of the fresh air that they're breathing all the time. It's like being outside in a sense. So we can imagine that buildings that provide those kinds of environments will have the variety and choice in the workplace that people are looking forward to. I didn't go into detail, but at our project at City View, we provide that kind of natural ventilation on the bridges that connect the towers so that you have the opportunity to leave your desk and have a feeling of having stepped outside for fresh air, even though you're still inside the building.
I wonder if the policy environment will change, if it will be introducing higher standards for ventilation and filtration, and that office owners will have to be doing all kinds of fancy retrofits. Do you have a sense, Ben?
It's similar to the previous question. We saw early on a lot of attention on adaptive retrofitting for short-term measures to address COVID specifically. But as this has gone on for so long, most of our clients, what we've seen, are focused on longer-term trends and the idea that, what people care about ultimately, the more timeless values are about people coming together for collaboration and connection. And short-term trends of adapting to the current moment, those are things that we now have some adaptability and resiliency and flexibility to address through working remotely in part. So we don't see a change necessarily happening with advanced air filtration or those kinds of measures in the current moment.
Another thing we're trying to understand at Joint Venture and at our institute is the actual trends in square footage itself. Mm-hmm. Are you close to this? Do you have your ear to the ground? Do you have a sense that the tech firms and other large employers are backing away from leases and feeling like they're going to need less square footage now?
Yeah, we've heard both sides of this, and I'm sure many have heard the similar things. And one argument is, with people able to work remotely, we need less space. But the other side is that the way people will work is going to require more collaboration space, and we won't just have a sea of desks with people packed in. We'll have different kinds of space, like some of the examples I shared. And so how that translates to exact square footage per person, I think we'll see as we experiment and evolve and come out of this.
Ben, we don't have much time left, but I want to become expansive here in our final 2 minutes or 90 seconds. Are we entering a phase that's sort of like Florence during the Renaissance? Are we going to continue to see fabulous architecture and magnificent iconic structures? Is that our trend?
Great question. We think that we're designing for experience that isn't just indulgent experience, but really about experience that engages people with purpose. As I mentioned about, after what we've learned and experienced in 2020, it's no longer enough to just design for that indulgent experience, but it really has to be experience around purpose and mission. And so we can imagine that taking place in iconic structures or integrated use districts, mixed use environments. I am very optimistic about what will happen. We experienced an epidemic, a pandemic before, the Spanish flu, 100 years ago. And out of that, we had one of our best decades ever, the Roaring 20s. So that's where my mind is as I think about how we will come out of this.
Ladies and gentlemen, he is Benedict Tranel. We have been very fortunate to have you on our program today. Thank you for bringing your insight and your expertise to our online gathering.
Thank you very much.